Firstly, on the war front, big developments over the course of the week. The Russian Defence Minister, Sergei Shoigu, called up his counterparts in the US, the UK, France and Turkey with evidence that Ukraine is planning to use a so-called dirty bomb, which is a regular bomb.
A conventional explosive packed with radioactive material to contaminate large areas.
Yeah, once it detonates.
Yeah.
So, would be, have quite a major impact. And the evidence that Russia has presented was laid out at a closed-door meeting of the United Nations Security Council yesterday and was taken very seriously from the reports that we've received. So what the Russians are suggesting is that this would be a false flag provocation that would be blamed on Russia and would provide the pretext for what they call a powerful anti-Russian campaign, including possible expulsion of Russia from the UN Security Council. So by getting out ahead of this, hopefully it will prevent it from happening. The other thing is that on the 24th of October, a statement was issued by Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, commander of Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical protection troops. It said, "We have information about contacts between the Office of the President of Ukraine and representatives of the United Kingdom regarding the possible reception of technologies to create nuclear weapons."
And as one of our long-time collaborators pointed out to us recently, Ukraine, a lot of the Soviet Union's not just heavy industries, but nuclear science and technology division departments were based in the former Ukrainian SSR. So there is that latent capacity there. Despite all of the collapse over the last 30 years since quote-unquote independence, they do still retain the know-how to be able to throw something like that together relatively quickly.
That's right, and this fellow Kirillov is suggesting that they were getting assistance as well from the United Kingdom. So
well, that figures the British never met a war that they didn't want to fan the flames of.
Absolutely. Now, on the other side, from the United States side, the other side of our dangerous Anglo-American allies, the US Army's 101st Airborne Division, one of America's most elite assault divisions, has 4,700 soldiers currently deployed in NATO member state Romania. It's their first deployment into Europe since the end of World War II. Now, I want to show a video here because it just, gives you the colour of this situation, which, how close these guys are to the border of Ukraine, and the question of American boots on the ground in Ukraine, of course, being raised. So CBS News did some interviews. They were there on the ground on the 21st, this report came out on the 21st of October. And, there were commanders that were interviewed by them who said, quote, "They're fully prepared to cross the border into Ukraine if the fighting escalates." So we'll roll that clip.
Since the start of the war in Ukraine back in February, the U.S. military has added an additional 20,000 troops to the European theater, taking the total there to around 100,000. And many of those troops are in Eastern Europe. Only on CBS Mornings, we're getting a look at the U.S. forces closest to the fighting in Ukraine, supporting NATO allies and sending a very clear message to Russia. Charlie D'Agata is in Romania for us this morning. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning, Tony. Romania is now home to the 101st Airborne Division. It's the first time it's been headquartered here in Europe in nearly 80 years. This is some of the equipment they brought from home, a 777 howitzer, ready to roll at any minute. They're specifically trained to deploy on any battlefield in the world within hours.
Go, 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 go!
Ready to fight. The reason one of America's most elite air assault divisions has been sent right here, right now. We joined Deputy Commander Brigadier General John Lubis and Colonel Edwin Mathaidis, commander of the 2nd Brigade combat team, on board a Black Hawk helicopter for an hour's chopper ride to the very edge of NATO territory, around 3 miles from the border with Ukraine. From the start of the war, Russia advanced from Crimea along the Black Sea to Kherson, aiming to capture port cities like Mykolaiv and Odessa to landlock Ukraine. We're right about here.
We're ready to defend every inch of NATO soil. Why is it necessary to have the 101st here? We bring a unique capability. We're a light infantry force, but again, we bring that mobility through our aircraft and our air assaults.
We skirt along the Black Sea coast as we head further north.
We're roughly 20 miles away from Snake Island, this contentious island that's been fought over between the Ukrainians and the Russians, currently under Ukrainian control.
At a forward operating site, we watched as U.S. soldiers and Romanian troops pounded targets in a joint ground and air assault. The tank rounds and artillery fire are real. So is the enemy, meant to recreate the fight against Russian forces in Ukraine. A message to Russia and NATO allies alike, we're here.
The real meaning for me to have the American troops here is like if you were to have allies in Normandy before any enemy was there.
In all, roughly 4,700 soldiers of the 101st Screaming Eagles from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, have been deployed to reinforce NATO's eastern flank.
You've had an opportunity to watch, observe, and possibly study the Russians. What do you think of them so far?
So we're closely watching them. So we're building objectives to practice against that, replicate exactly what's going on in Ukraine. We're the closest American unit to be fighting in Ukraine.
And what does that feel like? What does that mean?
It keeps us on our toes, right? So it makes my
Ready to fight tonight is a message that we've heard repeatedly. It's not just about defending NATO territory, but if the fight escalates and NATO partners are under threat, they're fully prepared to cross over into Ukrainian territory if ordered to do so. Back to you in the studio.
Oh boy. Charlie D'Agata Force in Romania, 101st Airborne, they've deployed to every major conflict since D-Day, and you sure hope they don't have to add another one to the list.
Yes.
Oof, scary stuff. You're glad we have them, though. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, so pretty spine-chilling stuff. And the US Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor reacted to this in a YouTube interview he did with Judge Napolitano. And I want to play a couple of clips of his reaction to that because, as he says, there's a very serious proposition here about creating some kind of a coalition of the willing, short of full NATO commitment, to get boots on the ground.
As a tripwire force
Well,
for a larger war.
That's the scary part, that if they were to send troops in and suffer a mammoth defeat, would that be the trigger for a nuclear exchange? So we'll listen to that.
A public comment that General Petraeus made, in which he said the United States and some NATO countries should lead some sort of an allied force, not a NATO force, but some sort of a coalition of the willing, to quote George W. Bush, on the ground in Ukraine against the Russians. And knowing Petraeus as I know you do, I'm sure you know that he wouldn't have said something like that without having run it up the flagpole first. So first, what do you think militarily of what General Petraeus has offered? And secondly, who, since he's a civilian now, up the flagpole, would he have run this past? Who else wants this? Does the Secretary of State actually expect his boss, the President of the United States, whose administration is tottering on the brink and whose physical existence is tottering on the brink, to put American troops on the ground? I'm asking you a lot all at once. I'll let you take those balls and run with them.
Well, on the first question, I think we have to regard this as having been a kind of trial balloon. In other words, Petraeus was given this material and told to run with it because the people in Washington are interested to see or hear what kind of a response, if any, they get from the American people. That's the first thing. Secondly, unfortunately, I do think there is serious planning going on about the use of U.S. forces in Ukraine. I think it's very dangerous. I think it's ill-conceived, but it's going on. Third, the mention of a coalition of the willing is a dead giveaway because NATO is not united on this issue. Most people in Europe are not interested in being dragged into a war with Russia.
The storied American 101st Airborne is in Europe for the first time since World War II. They're in Romania. What are they doing in Romania?
Well, according to the reports, there are about 5,000 of them. This is a mix of light infantry and UH-60 aircraft. I don't know if they have a battalion of H-64D attack helicopters with them, but they're supposedly working with Romanian forces. Again, this looks like one wing or one leg of the coalition of the willing. Then the rest of the division is up in Poland, which is several hundred miles north. And there are all sorts of rumors on the internet, and people are saying, oh, well, they're going to fly in to Odessa and set up a blocking position to prevent the Russians from moving on Odessa. And they'll be reinforced. Okay, I find it hard to believe that we would be quite that stupid, because Odessa is very definitely on the menu for the Russians. It's a Russian city, a Russian-speaking city. It's never been Ukrainian. And they are going to retake it, just as they're going to retake Kharkov for the same reasons. And that's probably where they would stop normally. But if this happens, I don't think the outcome will be a positive one for the United States and its coalition of the willing. And then, of course, the question is, if we sustain heavy casualties and we are seen as losing, are we then going to turn to nuclear weapons? Because as I've said repeatedly on this thing, I have never seen any interest on the Russian side in the use of a nuclear weapon. I've seen nothing to indicate it. The statements that have been made were always made in response to us, response to anyone who questioned whether the Russians would respond if they were attacked with a nuclear weapon. And they made it very clear that they will. And this is the problem with this limited nuclear war business. But I think now the danger is we could walk into this. And as I tried to point out in that short 1,000-word op-ed, we're not ready. This is sort of get set and go in whether you're ready or not. And we're not ready. The infrastructure isn't there. The tons of ammunition are not on hand. The force sizes don't make any sense. I mean, we keep saying, well, the Russians were stupid when they went in, they made all these mistakes. Well, the Russians at least went in there with a goal of not killing fellow Orthodox Slavs. That was a goal. Didn't want to kill them. All right, that didn't quite work out as they'd hoped. But now we're talking about going in, and we have no such guidelines or constraints, but we don't have the forces. And we're now saying, well, the Russians are building forces. Well, there's a reason for that. This place is the size of Texas. If you don't have several 100,000 troops, you're not going to be able to dominate it. How are we going to do this? I think it's insane.
All right, now, the Russian ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, told Newsweek 2 days ago, he said, "We do not intend to put up with the situation where military threats increase on the Russian borders. The direct involvement of the US military in combat will lead to catastrophic consequences." So, they're not just going to sit back and watch these forces creeping closer and closer to the border.
I mean, that was the reason for the whole military intervention into Ukraine in the first place, as we've discussed here before. And one thing to understand is that despite what you might read in the news, Russia does not bluff. Putin does not bluff, ever. If they say they will do something, then that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, they're true to their word on things of that nature. And the other thing to bear in mind as well, Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector who exposed the weapons of mass destruction scam that led us into the Iraq war, so he knows the nature of the lies that lead us into wars very well, intimately. He wrote an article for Consortium News just recently discussing the fact that NATO is holding these nuclear exercises called Steadfast Noon, where they're literally practicing the delivery of nuclear weapons against a Russian target. Now, at the same time, Russia at the moment is running its annual GROM nuclear command and control exercise. That's an annual thing, and they're informing the relevant people, including the US, that that's going on.
Yeah. Which at least, the US military brass themselves came out and said, look, this is normal, this is, we're in constant, deconfliction per standard practice with Russia on this, just like we always are. They haven't breached any protocols, any treaties, they're just doing their regular exercise. So at least, it's bad when the military are the ones trying to calm things down, right? And all the politicians are just going off their heads.
And I don't know if you got to look at it, but John Helmer also has an article out, so this has just come out, but it's talking about the thinking in the Western countries being that we can make a shift to the idea that nuclear war is winnable, and apparently where the US is positioning its subs in order to take out a Russian second strike capability, if it comes to that.
Yeah, so John Helmer, for those who don't know, is a Australian-born independent journalist. He's the longest established foreign journalist in Moscow. He's been there since most of the time since 1985, personally, and has had his own press bureau set up for most of that time. So he's very well connected. In this case, it's not his article, but a translation of one published in a Russian journal called Vzгляд that mostly focuses on strategic affairs and security matters. And so, what they're saying is that this American SSBN, so ballistic missile submarine, just popped up in the Arabian Sea as a deliberate signal. I mean, these things, the whole point of these things is that then you're not supposed to give away your position. So if one of them surfaces in a sensitive area, it's obviously a message to somebody. And so what this article goes through, it's by, I forget the name of the gentleman, but he's a well-known and respected military analyst in Russia, according to our sources. And so he just goes through what are the implications of this, saying that, if because these are the Trident missiles that people might be familiar with, the UK has them as well. That's their nuclear deterrent is Trident. They don't have the land-based missiles like the Americans have. But this is a large submarine that can carry 24 of these missiles, each of which is capable of carrying up to 10 individually targetable warheads, so 240 nuclear warheads potentially on this one submarine. And so what this guy goes through is that, of course, success is never guaranteed, but they're just demonstrating that they have the capability to launch a strike to get inside Russia's guard, because these missiles, they're ballistic missiles, but they can also be fired on a flat trajectory that makes them less accurate. But with that level of firepower, it doesn't really matter, because they're in range of the Russian Missile Forces command, various command centers, and of their known positions of their land-based nuclear assets that would respond to a nuclear strike on the Russian homeland, which is their trigger for it. See, Russia has a no first use nuclear doctrine, except where an existential threat to its existence exists, which of course, there's no potential of the Ukraine conflict being that unless the Americans get directly involved.
Yeah.
But the Americans, as you said, they have this concept for almost 20 years now that they've been moving closer and closer and closer towards this idea that, well, the number of warheads has come down. It's not an overkill arsenal anymore. It actually is for practical purposes.
The yield of the weapons
well,
is less.
exactly. They now have these dialer yield bombs where you can turn down the TNT what they call tonnage, so the equivalent of tons of TNT in a nuclear warhead. You can dial it down to make it usable at a tactical level instead of just a strategic level. The old mutually assured destruction. And so yet again, it's our side trying to change the rules and create this untenable situation to try to force the Russians to back down while accusing Russia of doing that, which it absolutely is not and never has.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about our side, Australia in the midst of this has decided we're going to send our forces over to the UK to train Ukrainian troops.
We're 70 specialist troops to go and train Ukrainian reservists or whatever they're saying in the UK. But it's a classic example of mission creep, right? It was 6 months ago, it was like, we're not going to get into any of that, we're just going to supply material aid. And now it's like, well, and I can guarantee the way these guys work, remember Iraq, it'll be, well, since you're here anyway, how about you participate in this next thing and this next thing and this next thing, and before you know, we've got boots on the ground in Ukraine if we don't already.
Oh, for sure. And we're sending more Bushmasters, apparently. We're apparently sending these kamikaze drones made in Melbourne.
Yeah, little tiny things that you can launch from hand portable, like those 40mm grenade launchers that they sling under the barrels of the assault rifles that the troops use. So yeah, these things, they're swarm capable, autonomous drone, loitering munitions. People might have heard that term.
Yeah.
They hang around until the target's identified and then they come in from multiple directions. And it can be equipped with various types of anti-personnel and anti-armour warheads. And they're only small, but they're quite potent for their size.
Yeah, it would be deadly in certain circumstances. And for the first time, additionally, our RAAF are participating in NATO exercises in the Mediterranean, the Sea Guardian mission in southern Italy to provide apparently surveillance data to NATO
Which again,
troops.
this is anti-submarine warfare, so this is finding and targeting Russian submarines to take out the deterrent, that type of thing.
Yeah, and whoever they had on TV, the news last night, justifying this was saying, we can't let a big country like Russia bully a little country like Ukraine. Well, yeah, but what about if it's the US and the UK and the big countries using Ukraine as a proxy? That never comes into their equation when they're talking about it in this way. And the other question is the push to have some kind of a negotiation to sue for peace is being held up by people saying, it's up to, the West says it's up to Ukraine to decide to negotiate. But the point is that Ukraine wouldn't have a choice in the matter if they weren't being fed with weapons and assistance from the Western countries. They would be forced to do it, so you'd have a completely different situation.
Yeah, and of course, as you said, they've been run as a proxy this whole time, since the coup in 2014. Everybody knows this, unless they're lying to themselves.
Yeah.